everyone, it's Alice, and today we are going to take a look at how my reading went in 2023, how I did on my reading goals. We're going to take a look at my reading spreadsheet and then maybe make some reading goals for 2024. I think 2023 was a good, solid reading year for me. I feel like I sort of got back into the groove. I think 2022 was one of the worst reading years I had, also because I felt quite slumpy a lot throughout the year. But in 2023, I feel like I was really enjoying my reading. I didn't read like 100 books in the year like I used to, but I feel like I had a solid amount of books that I read. I read a lot of good books, and most importantly, I really enjoyed reading. The only reading goal that I made for 2023 was to read 52 books, so about a book a week. And when I made that goal, I remember in the video, I talked about how I was going to put it at 52 on Goodreads, and on Goodreads, like in their reading challenge, it will tell you if you're behind on your goal. And in past years, I've found that to be really stressful, but this year, I didn't really find it that stressful. I feel like I had a very steady reading, so I never got too far behind, and it was just kind of like fun and actually motivating, which is what it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be like super stressful, and this year it wasn't. I did reach my reading goal. I actually went a little bit above it. I read 54 books in 2023, which I'm really happy with. I feel like that's solid, and I'm hoping that I can keep up this level of reading in the new year. But I have a couple of things that I've seen in my spreadsheet that's interesting with my reading this year, and I think we should just take a look at it and discuss, because although my reading has been great and I've really enjoyed it, there are some things where maybe I feel like I should have read a little bit more of this or a little bit more of that, and yeah, we should probably just take a look at it. Now, if you saw my video where I went through my spreadsheet last year, you will recognize some of this at least. It's pretty similar, but I have made a couple of changes this year. I've added some stuff that I'm tracking, honestly just for fun, and because I just like numbers and statistics, and I really enjoy filling out the books that I read in this spreadsheet. First, we have the most basic information. We have the title of the book, we have the author, how many pages the book is. I also track the gender of the author, and I keep track if they're a woman, a man, non-binary, or if it's like a collection of several people, or if there's something else that ever pops up. We have my rating of the book, the month I read it in, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, the year it was published, which is new this year. I didn't do this last year. And then I have whether or not it's a classic. I've also added genre this year, so I'm keeping track of the genres that I'm reading, which I didn't do last year. And I've also added what kind of vibe/mood the book is, just because, again, I think it's interesting to sort of see what kind of moods I usually go for. I don't know. I really like it. I do also think this vibe mood thing will actually help me when I'm recommending books to others, because sometimes when I do recommendations videos, I don't always remember everything that well, and having this in the spreadsheet I think is gonna help me make better recommendations in the future. Then we have age, so what age the book is meant for, whether it's adult, YA, middle grade, or for children. We have, of course, the language the book is in. I read books in English and Norwegian. We have whether or not it's a reread, if the book is translated, if it's in a series, if the author is BAME/BIPOC, and then lastly, we have whether or not it's an audiobook. Now, all of this is great, of course, and I really enjoy filling this out, but the main thing that we're getting from filling this out is statistics and like percentages, which I really like. So we are gonna take a look at that because that's the most interesting part. Now I'm just gonna go through this, and let's start with my ratings. So I give ratings from 1 to 5 stars, and as you can see here, my average rating is 3.46, which I actually think is pretty good. I only had one book that I gave 1 star to. I had 6 books that I gave 2 stars to, 18 books that I gave 3 stars to, 25 books that I gave 4 stars to, and 4 books that I gave 5 stars to. I think that's pretty good, and comparing it to previous years, this is very much what my ratings usually look like. I think maybe sometimes, like some years, I have more 5-star reads, but I'm getting more and more like strict about what I give 5 stars. But as long as we have a really high percentage of 4-star reads, I feel like it's a good reading year. Like most of the books that I read are 3 stars or more, which to me is amazing. For the authors, I read 70% female authors, 20% male authors, 6% other, and usually I use this if it's like a collection of stories and there are more than one author and stuff like that. I usually put in other. And then I read 4% non-binary author. Under that, we have how many books I read per month and how many pages it makes up. And I really like looking at this. You can see that it's usually like around 4 to 5 books a month, and then I had 1 month where I read loads, and then the last part of the year I didn't read that much. So it does fluctuate a little bit, but yeah, I feel like this is pretty standard. Like I mentioned, I ended up reading 54 books, and that makes out 4.5 books a month, and then in total I read 18,143 pages, which is great, and that makes out 1,512 pages a month on average. Under that, we have the ages of the books that I read in 2023. 81% of them were adult, 11% were YA, 6% were middle grade, and 2% were children. And then I have put in like one for other if I ever read something that like doesn't fit into any of those things. I can't think of what that would be, but you never know. Then I have the average year published of the books that I read. So the average year is 2010. I read a lot of like more modern books, I'm noticing, and especially this year I read a lot of newer books. So I think maybe I would like to read more classics so that this is a little bit lower, but for 2023 it was 2010. And then my average pages per book were 336. Moving on, we have how many fiction books I read, how many nonfiction books I read, and how many poetry books I read. I read 52 fiction books, so 52 out of the 54 books I read were fiction, which makes up 96%. I read 1 nonfiction book, which makes up 2%, and 1 poetry book, which also makes up 2%. This is something that I want to talk a little bit about later because this is actually like a little bit surprising to me. I usually have about 20 to 30% nonfiction. So this was a little bit of an off year for me when it comes to not only reading fiction. Then I read 3 books in Norwegian and 51 in English, so 6% Norwegian and 94% English. 2% of the books that I read were rereads. That's honestly, it's just 1 book. It's The Secret History. And then 98% were new to me. 9% of the books that I read were translated, which makes, that's like 5 books, and then the rest were not. I read 4 classics, which is 7%. And then I track this like whether or not it's in a series. I never really do anything about this. I just track it for kicks. Then 13 of the books that I read were by BAME/BIPOC authors, which makes up 24%. I only really keep track of this because I want to make sure I don't only read white authors, and it's just to remind me to diversify my reading. To be honest, I never really need to think about it that much, but I do think that this could be a little bit better, so it's something to think about. And then we have audiobooks. You might know that I'm not a huge audiobook person, and I only listened to 1 audiobook this year, which honestly is more than I usually do, so I feel like that's alright. Lastly, we have this, which I added this year. For some reason, I've never tracked the genres that I read. It's a pretty basic thing, but for some reason I just never did it. But I've added it to my spreadsheet this year, and I think this is pretty interesting. Now, I will say the way that I'm tracking it is that a lot of the books that I read, it's really difficult to put them only into 1 genre. So if it's 2 genres, it's registered as 2. I put in all the genres that the book is, like the main ones. So these numbers are like 6% of the 52 books are action and adventure, but like some of these are, does this make any sense? Like some of them have more than one genre, so they're tracked as both. I hope that makes sense. It makes sense to me, at least. I think this is pretty interesting though. 6% of the books that I read were action and adventure, 19% were contemporary fiction, 33% were fantasy, we have 11% graphic novels, 30% historical fiction, 7% horror, 2% memoir, 28% mystery, thriller, crime, 2% poetry, 17% romance, 6% science fiction, and 6% short story. I'm sure I could have added more genres and like subgenres, but it's a little bit too much for me, so we're just sticking with this. I think this is quite interesting though, because like adventure books are some of my favorite types of books, but I don't read them a lot because I find it really hard to find ones that I like. So this percentage, it makes sense that it's kind of low. I am a little bit surprised that so many of the books that I read are fantasy though, because I think that I don't read that much fantasy, but apparently I kind of do. Like 33% is a third of my reading falls under fantasy. A lot of those fantasy books are like usually in combination with other genres though, like historical fiction fantasy, or it's like urban fantasy, or just a book with magic in it I put under fantasy. I also read 30% historical fiction. I feel like this is a little bit unusual. I feel like I've read a lot of historical fiction this past year because I've really gravitated towards it. I don't know if it would be like, if that's a thing that happens every year. I feel like 20% mystery, thriller, crime makes sense because I really like mysteries and stuff. I read mostly mysteries, but I just find it easier to put all of this in one thing. We do have 17% romance though, which is interesting. This year I did try several romance books because it's a genre I don't often read, and I just thought it would be interesting to explore. But I also have noticed that not a lot, but some of the books that I have like romance elements to them. And because I'm sort of exploring that a little bit, I'm noticing it more. So I guess quite a lot of the books I have are either straight up romance, or they have like romantic plot lines that make it kind of romance. A lot of the things that I read are kind of combinations of these things though, but I do feel like this makes sense. The very last thing that I've added to my spreadsheet is the vibe/mood of the book. And I just did this for kicks because I think it's interesting. And again, it's one of those things where I put in more than one mood per book. So this means that 22% of the 54 books are cozy. And I just really like this. Again, I think it will help me recommend books better. And it also makes me think of books in a different way. When I put it in the spreadsheet, I have to think about what kind of vibe the book had. I do think some of this, like how I've classified it, is a little bit subjective, but it's how I felt about the book. 22% of the books that I read were cozy, 31% of them were fun, 41% were mysterious, 28% were dark, 19% were tense, 20% were adventurous, 19% reflective, 11% sad, 15% atmospheric, 9% creepy, and 2% scary. I don't really know if I need both of these, but for some reason I added both. 17% had a magical vibe, 15% had a romantic vibe, 13% were thought-provoking, and 6% were informative. I have per book limited myself to only giving it 3 moods, or like 3 vibes. I only ever pick 3 of these because I think you can add most of these to most books. So I only pick the ones that I feel like are the most appropriate, or the ones that fit the book the most. The thing that's really fun about this spreadsheet though is that it makes me reflect on my reading, not only throughout the year, but also now at the end of the year and the beginning of a new one, where I'm like making maybe some new goals for the new year. It's a little revealing this, and it's interesting, and I can see some things that I would like to work on. For goals for the new year, I am gonna make a couple, but I am gonna be like I am every year, where I'm not gonna be too strict about it, because if I am, I don't enjoy it. But I am gonna make a couple of goals, and some like, I have some thoughts on how I would like my reading to be in the new year. The first goal that I'm gonna make is the same as last year. I'm gonna keep the 52 books a year goal. I feel like it just worked really well for me last year, so I am gonna do it in 2024 as well. So I'm gonna try to read a book a week, and we'll see how it goes. Maybe I'll go above, maybe I won't reach it, but I feel like 52 is like a solid, it's like a solid number that I think I can achieve without it being too stressful. My second goal, though, I'm not gonna put any numbers on, but as you could see in my spreadsheet, I did not read a lot of nonfiction last year. I read one out of all the books that I read. Like, I read so much fiction, and I miss reading nonfiction, and I want to get back into it. So I would like to just try to pick up more nonfiction books. I think, like, in past years, it's been like 20, 30, sometimes even 40% of my reading. I think that's a little bit unrealistic for me, but I'd like to pick up like a solid percentage. I don't know, somewhere around like 10, 15%. Maybe I should aim for that, because I have a lot of nonfiction books on my shelves, and for some reason I just haven't read them in the past year, but I want to try and get to some of them this year. I do also track how much poetry I'm reading, but I'm not really that bothered about that. If I read poetry, I read it. If not, it's fine. Then I think maybe I read 3 books in Norwegian. I maybe want to try and read a little bit more in Norwegian. We'll see. I'm not going to be super strict about it, but maybe a little bit more Norwegian books. And then I would like to read more translated books. Like, a few years ago, I used to read so much translated fiction, and I think I've just fallen out of the habit of it. And I would like to get more back into it, because I really, really enjoy it. So I don't know, again, maybe like 10, 15% of my reading, hopefully more, but like maybe I should aim for something like that. Because I'm making these goals of reading more nonfiction and more translated books, I think I'm just gonna leave it there. I don't think I should make any more. I would always like to read more classics. I had all these plans at the beginning of 2023 to read a bunch of classics, and honestly, I just didn't want to at some point, and I just stopped doing it. So I feel like I'm not going to make any goals about classics, but if I get to some, that would be great. If not, it's fine. Then in the past couple of years, I've tried to get into audiobooks, which is why I've added it to my spreadsheet. Like, I would like to get into audiobooks. I wonder if 2024 is the year that I give up on that, because you don't see that, right? I never talk about it, but I actually try a lot of audiobooks, and for some reason, I just can't freaking get into them. I made my way through one this year, like in 2023, but I don't know. I just don't really enjoy them that much, and for some reason, I can't concentrate on them, and I don't know what the issue is, but I don't know if audiobooks is really for me. So I think in 2024, I'm not gonna think about it that much. If I listen to one, fine, but I don't know. I feel like I've been trying to get into them for a long time, and it's just not really working. Other than that, I would like my average year published to be a little bit lower, but honestly, we'll see. I feel like my main goals are gonna be read about a book a week, so 52 books in the year, read a little bit more nonfiction, a little bit more like translated works, and that's gonna be enough. The point of having an interest in reading is to have fun with it. But yeah, I do really like the nonfiction one. I'm very motivated on, because I can't believe I only read one last year, and the thing is, the one that I read I didn't even really like. So it was a horrible year for nonfiction for me, 2023. I will say though, I am happy that I reread one book, because I'm really bad at rereading, and again, it's one of those things that I kind of want to try and get back into. I'm not gonna make any goals about it or anything, but I am happy that I reread at least one. It was also my favorite book, which was a lot of fun. But yeah, maybe I'll get to a couple of rereads in 2024. I don't know. That's kind of it for this video though. I'm really excited to get started on my 2024 reading. I also love like starting a new spreadsheet. It's one of my favorite things. Like it looks all clean and wonderful and I just find it really motivating. And hopefully 2024 will be a solid reading year just like 2023 was. I'd love to know if you have made any reading goals for the new year. Do you have anything you want to focus on? How many books do you want to read? Or maybe you don't care about that. Some people also track how many pages they want to read, which I think is really cool. But yeah, tell me all about it in the comments. And as always, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!